Cathay Pacific Flight 780 is currently descending with only one operational engine when an engine stall alert for Engine 1 is displayed on the ECAM. The situation has deteriorated significantly as they have now lost their last operational engine, which was crucial for reaching Hong Kong. This development has escalated their circumstances into an emergency, resulting in a substantial increase in cockpit workload. The crew promptly declared a mayday, informing Hong Kong approach of the dual-engine stall predicament. Time is of the essence, and the safety of both passengers and crew rests on the capabilities of the two pilots. Will they succeed in landing the aircraft safely? This is the account of Cathay Pacific Flight 780. On April 13, 2010, Cathay Pacific Flight 780 was being readied for its journey from Soekarno-Hatta International Airport in Indonesia to Hong Kong International Airport in China. The aircraft designated for this flight was an Airbus A330, equipped with two Rolls-Royce engines. Prior to departure, the captain conducted a thorough pre-flight inspection to confirm the aircraft's safety and readiness. He completed the walk-around inspection without identifying any abnormalities. During this process, he observed the fueling dispenser operator performing a water check on the fuel sample, which appeared clear and free of contaminants. However, unbeknownst to the captain, there were multiple instances of vibrations in the fueling hose during the refueling process. The dispenser operator attributed these vibrations to air trapped within the hydrant piping, which had been disturbed due to recent extension work, and he halted the refueling each time. The vibrations were halted before the process resumed. However, these vibrations served as a foreboding indication of a more serious problem. The refueling trucks draw fuel from underground tanks, passing it through a filter on the truck before it enters the aircraft. Unfortunately, salt water had unintentionally contaminated the fuel supply, compromising the integrity of the superabsorbent polymer filters, commonly referred to as SAP filters. These filters are intended to eliminate water from the fuel, but exposure to salt water causes them to deteriorate, releasing small SAP particles into the fuel system. Although these particles did not produce immediate visible issues, and thus went undetected during routine inspections, they posed a significant risk that could lead to severe complications during the flight. The aircraft had approximately 10,000 kg of fuel remaining from the previous flight, and an additional 24,400 kg was loaded as scheduled by Cathay Pacific Airways. After confirming the fuel levels and completing all safety checks, the captain authorized boarding, and 309 passengers entered the aircraft. The crew comprised 2 pilots and 11 cabin attendants. Captain Malcolm Waters, aged 35, had been with Cathay Pacific for 12 years, amassing over 7,000 flying hours, including 2,500 on the A330. For this flight, he served as the monitoring pilot. First Officer David, 37 years old, had accumulated just over 4,000 flight hours, with 1,000 on the A330. His prior flying experience included 11 years of service with the Australian Air Force, and he was designated as the flying pilot for this flight after all passengers had boarded. The Airbus departed from the gate and, after a brief taxi, reached runway 28. The wind conditions were variable at 2 knots, with visibility extending to 7 kilometers. Scattered clouds were observed at an altitude of 1,800 feet, while a few cumulonimbus clouds were present at 2,000 feet. The temperature registered at 28 C at 24:08 in the morning. Upon receiving clearance for takeoff, the co-pilot advanced the thrust levers, initiating the aircraft's acceleration down the runway. Within 30 seconds, the Airbus ascended gracefully into the morning sky, allowing passengers to settle in and enjoy the tranquil views as their journey to Hong Kong commenced. However, shortly after takeoff, the pilots detected abnormal engine pressure ratios in both engines, with engine number 2 exhibiting more significant fluctuations than engine number 1. These fluctuations were the initial indicators of potential issues, as the engine pressure ratio, EPR, assesses engine efficiency by comparing the exhaust gas pressure to the intake air pressure. Abnormal EPR fluctuations suggest instability, which may lead to engine performance complications. More than half an hour into the flight, while cruising at flight level 390, the Electronic Centralized Aircraft Monitoring System (ECAM) alerted the crew to a control system fault in engine 2, located on the right side. Following an initial assessment and troubleshooting, a subsequent message indicated that engine 2 was responding more slowly than anticipated to throttle inputs. This delay could stem from various underlying issues, including fuel supply problems, system issues related to the air intake, mechanical failures, or sensor malfunctions, prompted the crew to reach out to maintenance control to address the observed fluctuations. The maintenance engineer advised the pilots to manipulate the thrust levers and monitor the engine's responses. Upon doing so, they recorded that the engine pressure ratio continued to fluctuate. Nevertheless, the crew opted to proceed with the flight to Hong Kong, as all other engine parameters appeared normal, unaware that the situation would deteriorate during their descent to 38,000 feet. The control system fault warning for engine 2 re-emerged on the ECAM, accompanied by a slow response warning and an advisory to avoid rapid thrust adjustments. The pilots activated the engine anti-ice system in hopes of rectifying the abnormal EPR readings, but this did not stabilize the fluctuations. They contacted maintenance control once more to report that the fluctuations had intensified and inquired about the safety of continuing to Hong Kong. The maintenance engineer suggested that the EPR fluctuations in engine 1 might be a result of the flight computer compensating for the irregularities in engine 2. He instructed the crew to closely monitor the parameters, refrain from rapid thrust changes, and adhere to the Flight Crew Operating Manual (EFCOM) procedures in the event of any exceedances. He also indicated that the fuel metering unit in engine 2 would be replaced upon their arrival in Hong Kong, to which the crew agreed. The flight continued for an additional 2 hours, during which the situation deteriorated without the pilot's awareness. The aircraft was now descending towards Hong Kong, approximately 23 kilometers southeast of the international airport. Suddenly, the captain detected a faint popping sound, accompanied by a sharp odor of ozone and burning. Almost immediately, the aircraft's ECAM system displayed multiple error messages in quick succession, indicating a malfunction in engine 1, while a subsequent alert pointed to an engine compressor stall, a potentially critical issue. An engine compressor stall occurs when airflow through the compressor stage of a jet engine is disrupted, leading to a sudden loss of compression pressure. This condition can result in reduced thrust, abnormal vibrations, and sometimes loud noises resembling explosions. In response, the flight crew executed the necessary ECAM procedures, adjusting the thrust lever of engine 2 to the idle position, which is the minimum thrust setting. They then increased the thrust of engine 1 to maximum continuous thrust to offset the reduced power from engine 2. However, the N1 speed of engine 1, which indicates the performance of the low-pressure compressor, only temporarily rose to approximately 57% before plummeting back to around 37%. The crew found themselves in a critical situation. Engine 2 was inoperative, and engine 1 was underperforming. Confronted with this emergency, the crew promptly declared a pan-pan to Hong Kong Air Traffic Control, urgently requesting a course adjustment for priority landing. Landing permission was granted to proceed directly to waypoint limes. In response, Air Traffic Control alerted the airport fire services by declaring a local standby, ensuring that emergency personnel were on high alert in accordance with standard operating procedures for a single-engine inoperative scenario. The captain, assumed control of the aircraft as the pilot flying, while the co-pilot took on the role of pilot monitoring. The captain instructed the cabin crew to prepare for landing and communicated with the in-flight service manager, informing her of an issue with engine number 2 and that air traffic control had granted them a priority landing. At this point, the situation appeared to be somewhat manageable, however. As fuel continued to flow into the engines, conditions deteriorated. A few minutes later, approximately 83 kilometers southeast of Hong Kong International Airport, an Engine 1 stall message was displayed on the ECAM. The situation had escalated significantly as the monitoring system indicated the loss of the second engine, which they had relied upon to reach Hong Kong. The circumstances quickly evolved into an emergency, leading to a substantial increase in cockpit workload. Following Airbus and company procedures for the R330, the crew declared a mayday, notifying Hong Kong approach of the dual-engine stall. They were promptly cleared to descend to 3,000 feet. The captain disconnected the autopilot and flight directors, opting to fly the aircraft manually. ECAM actions were executed, and the thrust for engine number 1 was reduced to idle. The aircraft was in a disengaged state, and with both engines idling, the captain assessed their control capability by sequentially adjusting the throttle for each engine. However, no changes in thrust were observed in response to these adjustments, indicating that the aircraft had effectively become a large glider. The degradation of the filters due to exposure to salt water had released sap particles that clogged the main metering valve, a critical component for regulating fuel flow to the engines. This valve operates with a piston that moves within a cylinder. When pilots manipulate the thrust levers, the piston adjusts the fuel flow to the A330's turbofan engines. Unfortunately, during the flight, the valve failed to respond to the commands due to the clogging from sap particles, which hindered its movement and disrupted the fuel supply to the engines. Concerned about a potential loss of electrical power if both engines were to fail, the flight crew activated the auxiliary power unit and switched the engine start selector to ignition. The captain then readjusted the thrust levers to evaluate the engine responses, resulting in the N1 speed of the first engine increasing to approximately 74%, while the second engine continued to operate below idle speed. Air traffic control made both runways 7 left and 7 right available for landing. In an effort to resolve the thrust control issue, the flight crew executed the all-engine flame-out fuel remaining checklist from the quick reference handbook for the second engine. They manually deployed the ram air turbine, activated the AAPU bleed, and toggled the master switch for engine number 2 off and then back on. Engine number 2, however, continued to operate at a sub-idle speed. The crew proceeded to set the flaps to 1 and attempted to reduce the speed for landing by decreasing the thrust on engine number 1. Unfortunately, there was no corresponding reduction in its speed. The engine persisted in operating as if it was still configured for climbing. Consequently, they found themselves flying at an excessively high speed for a standard landing, which posed a significant risk. The captain then made a public announcement to the passengers, indicating a minor issue with the engines and advising them to remain seated and adhere to the instructions of the cabin crew. High-drag devices, including speed brakes and landing gear, were deployed. However, the substantial thrust from engine number 1 made it evident that they would be landing at an elevated speed. Fully cognizant of the critical nature of the situation, the captain skillfully maneuvered the aircraft to touch down as close to the beginning of the runway as possible. Due to the high workload and time constraints, the crew did not communicate the unusually high-speed approach to air traffic control. The aircraft was flown in a zigzag pattern to gain additional time to decelerate, but despite these measures, the speed remained elevated. With only a minute remaining until touchdown, the overspeed warning activated, indicating they were traveling too quickly. Hong Kong approach granted the flight clearance to land on runway 7 left, noting that the surface wind was from the southeast at 13 knots. Their speed was considerably above normal, so much so that the flight computer failed to recognize the landing attempt, triggering the ground proximity warning system for terrain ahead. As the aircraft descended through 900 feet, the crew retracted the speed brakes, recognizing that while these devices were intended to prevent further acceleration, their continued extension posed a significant risk. Leaving them deployed could result in a harsh landing. Subsequently, the crew adjusted the flaps to position 2, however. A flashing F relief message appeared on the engine warning display, indicating that the flaps extended to an 8 angle rather than the commanded 14. The runway loomed closer with each passing second as the aircraft maintained an alarming speed. The pilots remained fully focused, acutely aware of the challenging landing that lay ahead. The cockpit was filled with the beeping of warning systems, heightening the already tense atmosphere. After a nerve-wracking descent, the aircraft touched down on runway 7 left. Upon landing, the right main gear bounced, causing the aircraft to momentarily lift off the ground again. It then rolled left by 7 and pitched down, resulting in the lower cowling of engine number 1, scraping against the runway surface. Spoilers deployed automatically, and maximum manual braking was engaged, along with the activation of both engine thrust reversers. However, only the thrust reverser for engine number 1 functioned properly. The aircraft came to a complete stop on the runway, just beyond taxiway 18, with the nose wheel approximately 309 meters from the runway's end. The total distance required to halt the aircraft from the moment of touchdown was around 2,600 meters. Yet, the situation was not entirely resolved. After the parking brake was engaged, the captain addressed the passengers, requesting that they remain seated. The situation was assessed, revealing that engine number 1 continued to operate at 79% thrust, despite being set to idle. Consequently, the flight crew proceeded to shut down both engines by turning off the master switches for engine number 1 and engine number 2. The cockpit display indicated that brake temperatures had reached a critical level of 995 degrees Celsius, prompting the crew to contact air traffic control, a TC, for information regarding a potential wheel fire. The tower controller reported no visible fire and recommended that the crew reach out to the rescue leader. Upon assessment, the rescue leader confirmed that the brakes on both the left and right landing gears were excessively hot, with visible smoke and a small fire. In response, the captain ordered an emergency evacuation and deactivated the auxiliary power unit, a PU using the fire push button. All 8 emergency exit doors were utilized after the cabin crew verified that there was no fire or smoke outside the exits. Some passengers disregarded the crew's instructions and took their cabin bags with them before using the slides. The entire evacuation process was completed in approximately 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The captain, co-pilot, and in-flight service manager conducted a thorough check of the cabin to ensure that no individuals remained on board before exiting. Fortunately, all passengers evacuated safely, and there were no fatalities. Following the incident, a comprehensive investigation was conducted, revealing that the refueling facility at Wanda International Airport had recently undergone significant renovations, including the replacement of several underground fuel pipes. Heavy rainfall had caused salt water to overflow from a nearby pond, which inadvertently contaminated the fuel system during this period. Giant steel pipes were measured, cut, and resealed. Unfortunately, salt water had entered the fuel supply, which compromised the superabsorbent polymer filters and allowed small sap particles to infiltrate the Airbus's fuel system. These particles caused the main metering valves of the fuel metering unit to become stuck, resulting in malfunctions of both engines. The valves remained fixed in positions that corresponded to the thrust output recorded for each engine as it neared Hong Kong. Fortunately, the situation was effectively managed by the skilled actions of the pilots, ensuring a safe outcome despite the challenges faced. We encourage you to subscribe to our channel and leave a like if you found this video informative.